I've lived in Ridgewood Hollow for almost 9 years. It's one of those HOA-governed suburbs just outside Denver, cookie-cutter homes, neatly trimmed lawns, Christmas lights on timers, and board members who treat bylaws like gospel. But our house sat on the far end of the development near the tree line. Secluded, quieter. That's why I bought it. That and the detached garage with the woodpile shed I built myself. My name is Jack Delaney. I'm a retired firefighter, a widower, and a father to a 12-year-old daughter named Molly. My life now is simple. Keep the house running, make sure Molly's doing all right in school, and stay warm through the Colorado winters. That last part you'd think wouldn't be a challenge for a man who's chopped and stacked his own firewood every summer since he was 18. But you'd be wrong. The first signs of trouble came early this year, late October. A freak cold front rolled in, dropping temperatures below freezing nearly overnight. I wasn't panicking. I had 3 cords of seasoned firewood stacked and tarped in our backyard shed. Oak and ash, split-dried, perfect. Enough to keep our living room stove burning well into February. That Monday, after walking Molly to the bus stop, I went to uncover the tarp and bring in the first week's load, and found the shed empty. Not vandalized, not broken into. Just empty. The tarp had been retied neatly. The shed door was locked, as I'd left it. There were no tire marks, no mess, not even a splinter of bark on the concrete floor. Someone had come onto my property, unlocked my woodshed, and taken everything quietly, efficiently. I stood there for a full minute thinking maybe I'd lost my mind. Maybe I was remembering wrong. Maybe I moved the cords to the garage earlier and forgot. But of course I hadn't. My back still ached from stacking the third cord just 2 weeks ago. I called my neighbor Donnie, a retired mechanic who lived 2 doors down, and sometimes helped me stack. "You didn't move any of my firewood, did you?" His chuckle turned into a cough. "I wish. My wife won't let me touch an axe anymore. See anyone near my yard recently?" There was a pause. "You don't know," he said, his voice lowering. "HOA sent a crew on Friday morning. Said something about a compliance concern. They were out there with a trailer. Thought you signed off on it." I hadn't signed anything. I hung up and checked my email. Nothing from the HOA. No notices, no violation forms, no warnings. Just the usual auto-blasted reminders about Halloween decoration guidelines and the upcoming board election. That night, the temperature dropped to 22 degrees. My backup space heater was barely enough to warm Molly's room. She was bundled under 2 blankets, a hat over her ears, but still shivering. I ended up dragging an old army sleeping bag into her room and sleeping on the floor beside her, listening to the wind claw at the windows. The anger came slowly first as disbelief, then confusion, then a slow, crawling burn that spread from my jaw to my fists. Who the hell gave them the right? The next morning, I marched down to the HOA office. It was inside a repurposed model home near the neighborhood entrance. Warm and carpeted with a fake fireplace humming in the corner. Linda Whitmore, the HOA's compliance officer, was typing something at her desk when I walked in. She barely looked up. "Hi, Mr. Delaney. How can I help?" "I'd like to know why my winter firewood was stolen." She blinked, leaned back slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "My shed, my firewood. Gone. A neighbor said your team was on my property Friday." "Oh," she said, drawing out the vowel like it was some distant memory. "Yes, we had a visual inspection last week. Your shed was noted as a visual violation, materials stacked in a non-conforming area visible from the road. It's behind my house. Well, technically, any part of your property visible from a neighboring lot is subject to curb appeal regulation, section 4.3a. And who approved removing 3 cords of firewood? The board. We followed procedure. You never notified me." She gave a tight smile. "We posted the notice on your front door. There was no notice. It may have blown away in the wind. And you didn't email call." She shrugged. "We acted in the interest of the neighborhood's aesthetic standards." I stared at her for a long moment, my hands clenched at my sides. "Where's the firewood now?" She tapped her keyboard. "The removal team was instructed to dispose of non-compliant material. I assume it was taken to waste management." "Bullshit. Firewood doesn't go to waste management. It gets burned or stored." I turned and walked out without another word. Back home, I opened the garage, fired up my old propane heater, and brought it inside. It hissed to life, glowing orange, but I knew the tank wouldn't last more than a day. And Molly was already coughing from the dry air. I sat in the dark that night staring at the cold fireplace, listening to the wind moan outside. Something inside me shifted, not rage, not vengeance. Something deeper, something colder. A decision. They thought I was some quiet old man they could push around. They forgot what I used to do for a living. They forgot I knew the law. By morning, I'd reread the Ridgewood Hollow HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Every word of the 74-page PDF they email, with pride to new homeowners, as if it were a sacred manuscript. I found Section 4.3a, just like Linda quoted. It was vague, deliberately so. Something about outdoor storage of natural materials being subject to review and enforcement if they affect the neighborhood's visual consistency. It didn't say anything about removing property without notice. It didn't say anything about trespassing. And it sure as hell didn't say they could steal from my shed. I needed answers, not platitudes. So I drove to the next HOA board meeting. They held it in the clubhouse on Glenroe Drive, one of those sterile little buildings designed to look charming with fake shutters and too much beige vinyl siding. There were about 20 folding chairs set out. Most were empty, except for the usual busybodies, Marjorie from Elm Street, who complained about barking dogs every meeting, Frederick, who wore a tie no matter the temperature, and a few others who seemed to be there more for the snacks than the governance. The board sat at the front behind a cheap laminate table. Linda was there, of course, along with the HOA president, Howard Klein, a round, balding man who looked like he'd never held an axe or lifted anything heavier than a cup of coffee. He greeted the room with that practiced fake warmth HOA presidents seem to rehearse in the mirror. When the floor opened for homeowner comments, I stood. "Jack Delaney, Ash Grove Court," I said. Howard nodded. "Yes, Mr. Delaney. I'd like to discuss the unlawful removal of my property from my shed last Friday. Specifically, the 3 cords of split firewood I'd stacked over the summer which were taken without notification or consent." The room quieted. Howard adjusted his glasses. "Ah yes, that matter was addressed in our emergency compliance review." "Emergency?" I asked. "There was no emergency, just cold weather." There were several complaints from nearby homeowners regarding visual disruption. The stacked wood was visible from a neighbor's upstairs window. A window that's 40 yards away through a tree line. That's a stretch. "We take visual cohesion seriously, Mr. Delaney," he said, folding his hands in front of him like a preacher. "It's what maintains property values. And is that worth violating property rights?" There was a small stir in the chairs behind me. Howard gave a tight smile. The firewood was deemed to be in non-compliance, and in accordance with Section 4.3a, the board approved removal. "You didn't notify me. That violates your own policy." I checked. Section 2.1d says, owners must be given 14 days to remedy non-compliance before enforcement actions are taken. Linda interjected, "The notice was taped to your front door. I already spoke with you about that. It was never there. Maybe someone removed it. Or maybe it was never posted." Howard leaned forward slightly, his tone sharpening. "Mr. Delaney, we're not here to debate minor procedural oversights. The point is, the issue was corrected." Corrected. I felt my voice lower, more dangerous. "You took fuel out of my shed in the middle of a record cold October. My daughter and I slept under army blankets while your office had a fire going. You corrected nothing." Murmurs again. I took out my phone, tapped open the photo folder. I have time-stamped photos of the stacked wood from 2 days before it disappeared. I have no violation notices, no emails, no signatures. That's called theft. Howard's smile vanished. "That's a serious accusation. So is trespassing." He glanced sideways at Linda. "We followed policy," she muttered, clearly less confident than before. I looked at the rest of the room. Some eyes were on me. Others shifted awkwardly, pretending not to notice. "I'm giving the board until the end of the week to either return my property or give a formal, signed explanation of its disposal, including who approved it, who removed it, and where it went, or what Howard asked, or I press charges." It was the first time I saw real fear flicker in his face. I left the meeting without another word. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The temperature had dropped below freezing. I could see my breath in the air like smoke. But I felt warm. Not from victory, not yet, but from resolve. That night, I knocked on Donnie's door again. He opened with a thermal shirt on and a worried expression. "You all right?" he asked. "Quick question," I said. "When you saw the crew at my place, were they wearing HOA uniforms?" He nodded. "Blue jackets with the Ridgewood logo. One of them was that kid Brady. I think he's Linda's nephew." I've seen him doing maintenance before. And the trailer, black, no logo, looked personal. That was enough. I drove home, went into the garage, pulled out my receipt box, and found the invoice for the lumber delivery I ordered back in March. $875, 12 loads, plus a printed copy of every HOA email I'd received that month, none of which mentioned any pending violations. Then I wrote out the timeline. And wood delivered March 12th. Wood stacked and tarped April, June. No violation notices sent or posted. Removal date, October 20th, according to Donnie. No advanced warning. No follow-up communication. I copied everything to a USB and printed out a clean folder of evidence. The next day, I walked into the county sheriff's office. The woman at the desk looked up. "How can we help you?" "I'd like to report a theft," I said. "Can you give us a few details?" I placed the folder on the counter. "I have full documentation. The suspect is the Ridgewood Hollow Homeowners Association." That got her attention. She raised an eyebrow. "You're saying your HOA stole something from you?" 3 cords of firewood. She stared at me for a moment, half expecting a joke. "Sir, you do realize I'm a retired firefighter. I know how to write a report, and I know the difference between a code violation and criminal trespass." She slowly picked up the folder. "I'll get Deputy Carlson." As I sat in the lobby watching the American flag outside stiffen in the wind, I realized something. They weren't ready for this. They thought they were just rearranging someone's backyard. But winter was coming, and I was just getting started. Deputy Carlson came out with my folder tucked under one arm, his other hand nursing a paper cup of coffee. He was a tall guy with wind-burned cheeks and a deputy's usual weariness about neighborhood disputes. But his expression changed after skimming the report I'd filed. 3 cords is a lot of firewood," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "It was all seasoned oak," I replied. "I chopped it myself. Took me all summer." He tapped the folder. "And you're saying the HOA didn't notify you?" "No notice, no email, no phone call, no signature, no posted violation form. Just an empty shed." He gave a slow nod. "That's not how this is usually handled." "I'm not asking for a SWAT team," I said. "I'm asking for a theft investigation." They entered my property, took personal property worth nearly $1,000, and offered no lawful justification. Carlson leaned back, folding his arms. "You got any surveillance footage?" "No, but I've got a neighbor who witnessed the removal. Said the trailer they used wasn't marked. Said he saw a guy named Brady hauling the wood. HOA board member's nephew." That made him look up again. He wrote something in his notepad. "I'll have to follow up with them," he said. "But I can't promise an arrest. HOA cases get messy. Civil versus criminal, it's a fine line." "Let me guess," I said. "You've had complaints like this before." "Plenty. Usually over lawn height or mailbox colors, but this is new." He closed the folder and stood. "I'll get statements. Files open. You'll get a case number by tomorrow." That was something. I left the sheriff's office, got back in my truck, and sat for a while, engine off, just watching snow flurries start to fall against the windshield. The kind of flakes that melt instantly, early warnings. A whiteout was coming. I could feel it in my bones. When I got home, I found Molly curled up on the couch with 3 layers of blankets and Scout, our black lab, sprawled across her feet. She looked up pale but smiling. "Hey, Dad," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "You all right?" I asked, crouching down to feel her forehead. Warm, not dangerously so, but close. "My nose feels like an icicle," she said. I fired up the propane heater again. The hiss and glow filled the room. I pulled the blinds tight and sealed the front door with an old towel. "How long's it been out?" I asked. "Stopped working around noon." The heater was dying. Only half the orange elements lit up now. I made a mental note to refill the propane tanks tomorrow. I brought out the hot water bottle from the back closet, old firefighter trick. I filled it with warm sink water, wrapped it in flannel, and tucked it near her stomach. Molly gave me a faint smile. "You're like a furnace." I smiled, but inside I was boiling. This wasn't just about firewood anymore. This was about safety, about dignity, about the sick irony of an HOA touting neighborhood integrity while leaving a kid to freeze in her own home. I called the HOA office that evening. No answer. Left a message. "Howard, Linda, this is Jack Delaney. My daughter's sick. We have no heat. You took my winter supply. I filed a theft report. The sheriff will be contacting you. I suggest you start getting your statements straight." No response. That night, we bundled up in the living room. I kept the propane heater on its lowest setting to conserve the little fuel left. I lay on the floor in my flannel coat and held Molly's hand under the blankets. Her breathing was shallow. Scout didn't leave her side. It was quiet, eerily so. No sound of cars, no neighbors talking. Just wind tapping against the windows and the distant creaking of tree limbs under frost. In the middle of the night, I heard something. A vehicle. I got up, walked to the window, and peeked through a slit in the blinds. A black pickup truck, unmarked, rolling slowly down the street with no headlights. I watched it stop near the HOA office, linger for a minute, then move on. It was 2:13 a.m. They were nervous. Good. The next morning, I scraped together what little propane I had left, took Molly to my sister's house, 2 towns over. She had central heating and told her everything. My sister Danielle was a lawyer. Civil litigation. The moment she heard the words unauthorized property seizure, her eyes narrowed. "You want to go nuclear?" she asked. I nodded. She pulled out her laptop. Then, let's file a formal cease and desist for any further property interference and demand written disclosure of chain of custody for the wood. If they fail to comply, we escalate. I'll draft it under your name as a homeowner. It took her an hour. The document was clean sharp and laced with legal warning shots. She knew how to write in a way that made bureaucrats sweat. I drove back to Ridgewood Hollow and slid the letter under the HOA office door before 10 a.m. That afternoon, I got a phone call. "Private number," I answered. "Mr. Delaney," the voice said. "Male, young." "Yes." "This is Brady. I just wanted to say I didn't know what I was doing. I thought we had permission." "Linda said it was all approved. You loaded my wood. I just followed instructions. They said you were notified. You saw the shed was locked. You unlocked it anyway." There was silence. "I'm sorry," he said, barely audible. I shouldn't have touched it. I let him sit in that silence for a few seconds more. "Thanks for your honesty," I said at last. "You might want to say the same thing to the sheriff." I hung up. I'd just won my first witness. That night, as I sat again on the cold floor of my half-warm living room, I felt something begin to shift, not just in the story, but in the air around the neighborhood. I wasn't the only one who had been pushed around. I was just the first one to push back. 3 days after the sheriff opened the case and my sister's cease and desist letter landed at the HOA's feet, things began to crack. The silence from the board had turned from arrogant to frightened. I could feel it in the way their weekly update emails, usually dripping with cheerful threats about landscaping fines, suddenly got shorter, more generic. No mention of wood, no mention of me. They were retreating behind bureaucracy, but I wasn't letting up. Molly was still at Danielle's. Her fever had broken, thank God, but her cough lingered. I wanted her home. I wanted her warm. I wanted her safe. And I wanted the people who thought they could mess with us to face what they'd done. It was Thursday morning when I ran into my neighbor across the street, Harold. He was an older guy, Vietnam vet, cane walking, and tough as iron. He waved me over while feeding birds from a bucket of cracked corn. "I heard you filed a police report," he said without preamble. "I did." "Good," he said. "About damn time someone stood up to them." I tilted my head. "You too." "They fined me last winter for leaving a snow shovel visible on my porch. Called it equipment clutter." He snorted. "I'm 83. Where do they expect me to keep it up a tree?" I gave him a half smile, then asked, "You didn't happen to see where my wood went, did you?" He nodded slowly. "Didn't see them take it, but I saw where they put it." My spine straightened. "Go on." 2 nights ago, just after that letter you dropped off, HOA clubhouse chimney was smoking. They had a fire going inside. Thought that was odd since they never used that place in winter. No insulation. I walked Scout past it later that night. The glass doors were open in the back, and I saw a stack of logs inside. Oak. Split just like yours. I didn't speak, I didn't blink. Harold kept going. And yesterday morning, I saw one of their trucks unloading wood into that weird prefab storage container behind the HOA office. No labels, just a beige box they set up this fall. Guess what I saw sticking out the side? What? An old yellow bungee cord. Same kind I saw you use on your tarps. That was all I needed. I shook Harold's hand. You just made my day. I got in my truck, pulled around the loop to the backside of the HOA clubhouse, and parked 2 houses away. Walked the rest of the way like I was just out for a stroll. And there it was. The storage container was locked, but the back vents were wide enough to see inside. I cupped my hands against the grate, peered in. Wood. Stacked, dried. My split pattern. I always notched the ends when I split logs, a habit from firefighting days, to check seasoning lines. The notches were there. I wasn't imagining it. I took out my phone, snapped pictures from every angle I could. The container, the bungee cord, the trailer tire marks in the frozen mud nearby. Then I walked up to the clubhouse back doors and looked through the glass. More wood. A half-burnt log still sitting in the ashtray of the indoor fireplace. I snapped another photo. Then I drove straight to the sheriff's office and handed the pictures to Deputy Carlson. Well, he said, flipping through the stack, this changes things. They didn't dispose of it, I said. They appropriated it, used it, stored it, lied about it. He rubbed his jaw. Which means this might cross the line from civil enforcement to misappropriation of private property. That carries weight. You need a warrant, I asked. He nodded. To search the container, yes, but with what we have, I can speak to the DA. I left the station with a copy of the complaint filed. The case number was real now. The law was in motion. But as I drove home, I felt the familiar unease that comes when predators get cornered. HOA boards, like bureaucracies, don't go down gracefully. They claw, smear, and twist. That afternoon, I found an envelope taped to my front door. No return address, just my name in cheap ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature, no letterhead. Drop the complaint and we'll return your wood. Keep pushing and we'll cite you for unauthorized storage again. Consider this your warning. That was it. No name, no one brave enough to own it. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I scanned the letter, emailed it to Danielle, then forwarded it to Deputy Carlson. He responded an hour later. Threats tied to active investigations, it was bad idea. We're forwarding to the city attorney. I called Molly that night. She sounded better. Are they in trouble yet? She asked. I smiled. Let's just say they're sweating. She giggled, even without your firewood, especially without it. I missed her laugh, missed her feet tapping on the hardwood, the little messes she made with art supplies, the smell of her peppermint tea in the evenings. Our home didn't feel like home without her, but she'd be back soon. And when she was, the house would be warm, and they would be cold. The next morning, I stood at my window drinking instant coffee and watching the frost sparkle on the neighborhood lawns. Then I heard the bang, a door slamming, a man stomping down a porch. It was Frederick, HOA treasurer, red-faced arms flailing, dragging a space heater out to his SUV and kicking the snowbank in frustration. He shouted something into his phone. His power was out. I turned on the news. A polar front was descending across the county. Power lines were buckling. Blackouts were already rolling through the subdivisions. And Ridgewood Hollow was right in the path. Their clubhouse had no insulation. Their container of stolen wood couldn't heat 20 homes. And my propane tanks, fully refilled yesterday. I looked at Scout. He wagged his tail once, then sat next to the heater. Smart dog. This was going to be a cold weekend. For some. That Friday morning, the snow came hard. Thick, wet flakes that fell sideways, driven by wind that howled between the eaves like something alive. Ridgewood Hollow looked like it had been dipped in frosting. Cars became lumps. Driveways vanished. Trees drooped under the weight of ice. And then the power went out. I heard the whole house sigh as it died. Furnace stopped. Fridge went quiet. The hum of the neighborhood disappeared. It was the kind of silence only winter brings, beautiful, yes, but dangerous too. I lit 2 oil lamps in the kitchen, checked the thermostat. It was already falling. Outside, I could hear the rustle of branches cracking under the weight. I double-checked my emergency kit, tested the radio, and moved the propane heater to the living room. Scout stuck close to my leg. Molly was still safe at my sister's. Danielle had sent me a text that morning. We've still got power here. Molly says hi, and she drew a cartoon of you fighting a dragon named Karen. You want to pick. I smiled despite myself. Tell her that dragon's about to lose. Before noon, I saw the first sign of collapse. Frederick, the HOA treasurer, was back in his driveway trying to jumpstart a portable generator. The thing coughed twice and sputtered out. He hit it with a snow shovel. Linda Whitmore drove past in her white SUV windows, fogged her face, twisted with frustration. She didn't wave. I waited until after lunch, then dressed in full thermals, coat, gloves, boots layered like I was heading into a fire line. I wasn't. I was heading into something colder. I drove slowly to the sheriff's department. The roads were slick and the city plows were busy elsewhere. The station's parking lot was mostly empty, except for a cruiser and an old Ford sedan parked sideways like someone had skidded in. Inside, Deputy Carlson was behind the desk holding a styrofoam cup and reading a printed report. "Mr. Delaney," he said, standing, "we've been expecting you." He led me into a side room and closed the door behind us. The heat was faint, in here backup generator most likely. "We spoke to Brady," he said, flipping through a stapled packet. "He confirmed he helped load your firewood. Said he was told by the HOA president it was pre-approved." "But there was no documentation," I said. "Correct. No paper trail. No photographs of your alleged violation. Nothing signed. And most importantly, no disposal receipt." I leaned forward. "So what does that mean?" "It means their story doesn't hold. They can't prove they had legal authority to enter your shed. No warrant, no court order. Not even HOA policy backs them up since your property wasn't in view from a public street. Their only justification is a vague clause about visual impact." He placed the papers in front of me. "In our opinion, this is misappropriation of private property." I nodded, jaw tight. "And that storage container out back?" I asked. Carlson smiled. "That's the kicker." He handed me a printed photo. The sheriff's office had obtained a warrant and conducted a search that morning, just before the storm hit. Inside the beige container behind the HOA clubhouse, they found over half a cord of firewood. My firewood. Identifiable by the notched cuts and even my initials branded faintly into two of the logs. Something I used to do when Molly helped me just for fun. Your evidence, your photos, and their failure to comply with the cease and desist, all of it helped. The DA's office is reviewing charges, most likely petty theft, criminal trespass, and possible abuse of authority. I exhaled. Not out of relief, out of cold-focused satisfaction. "They'll try to bury this," I said. "They'll say it was a misunderstanding." "They already are," Carlson replied. Linda left a message this morning trying to spin the narrative. Said it was all community beautification and they meant no harm. No harm. My kid got bronchitis. That's harm. He nodded. "We're documenting that too. Medical records help. I'll get you the file from the clinic." I stood and zipped my jacket. As I reached the door, Carlson said, "You did the right thing, Jack. I did what they made me do." Back home, I parked the truck just in time to see Howard Klein, the HOA president, trying to shovel snow out of his driveway with a plastic dustpan. His cheeks were bright red, scarf tangled, one glove missing. I watched as he gave up, dropped the pan, and leaned against his mailbox, defeated. He saw me, and I smiled. That evening, I warmed soup on the propane burner and texted Danielle to bring Molly home the next day. Power wasn't back yet, but the house was ready. I'd picked up a new load of firewood paid for with the $200 refund the HOA had sent quietly that morning, no note attached. I took it anyway. Scout barked once at the door. I opened it. Harold was standing there with two thermoses in hand. "Coffee," he said. "One's got whiskey. I forget which." I laughed and let him in. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the storm outside and the soft glow of the heater warming the room. "Never thought I'd live to see Howard shoveling snow with a dustpan," Harold muttered. Desperation makes people creative. Or stupid. We drank the coffee. Turns out I got the whiskey one. Before he left, Harold turned and said, "You lit the match, Jack. You know that, right?" "I didn't start the fire," I said. "I just made sure it burned in the right direction." When the door closed behind him, I walked to the window. The neighborhood was still and white. But under all that snow, things were shifting. And the people who once played gods with bylaws and fines, they were finally feeling the cold. Saturday morning dawned like something out of a postcard, sunlight bouncing off snow-blanketed roofs, icicles hanging like teeth from every gutter. Beautiful, yes, but still cold. Power hadn't returned to Ridgewood Hollow, and now the HOA board was facing a far greater storm than anything nature could conjure. I'd just finished stacking a second batch of firewood behind the garage when my phone buzzed. It was Danielle. "They're being called in," she said without even saying hello. "Howard, Linda, and Brady, all scheduled for interviews this morning." "Voluntary?" I asked. "For now, but they're rattled." Howard left a voicemail on my law firm's answering machine, begging to talk off the record. I chuckled. "He's too late for that. And you'll want to know this too," she added. The HOA sent a neighborhood-wide email this morning, trying to get ahead of it. I checked my inbox. Sure enough, there it was. Subject line: a message from the Ridgewood Hollow Board. Clarification and community integrity. I clicked. In recent days, misunderstandings have arisen regarding the board's efforts to uphold Ridgewood's aesthetic standards. We regret any distress caused by recent enforcement actions. These were never meant to harm or inconvenience any homeowner. We continue to cooperate with local authorities and appreciate the community's patience as we work through this matter. I read the words again, then hit forward and sent it to Deputy Carlson with the note they're building their defense. By noon, the HOA clubhouse, which had gone dark during the blackout, was buzzing with new energy, but not the kind they were used to. A police cruiser pulled up. 2 uniformed deputies stepped out. I watched from the sidewalk across the street, hands in my coat pockets, breath rising like smoke. Linda was already there waiting outside. She didn't have her usual power walk or clipboard confidence. Her red parka looked too big on her, as if she was trying to disappear into it. Brady arrived next, head down, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Howard came last, red-faced, bundled in a scarf, practically waddling. His eyes scanned the street nervously. He saw me. I didn't look away. He shuffled inside quickly. Deputy Carlson came out moments later, clipboard in hand. He stopped briefly outside, speaking to a second officer, then looked up. Our eyes met. He gave the smallest nod. It was happening. They were officially under investigation. I didn't need to be inside the room to know how the interviews would go. I knew the look of people cracking under pressure. I'd seen it during arson investigations back when I was still working the department. I'd seen liars try to explain their way out of chain of custody gaps, make up justifications they couldn't back with records, and I knew Carlson's kind of patience. He was the type to let silence do the heavy lifting, to let people talk themselves into corners. By 3 p.m., the interviews were done. Linda walked out first, face, blank lips, pinched, clutching a folder to her chest, like it might protect her from the cold or from guilt. Brady followed a few minutes later, looking pale and glassy-eyed. Then Howard, slower, more careful, like a man who knew the ground beneath him was beginning to crack. I walked past them casually as they reached the parking lot. Howard hesitated when he saw me. Jack. I stopped. Save it, I said, voice low. You should have knocked on my door. Instead, you broke the law. And now you've got cops chasing you through your own rules. He looked down, then said the one thing I didn't expect. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Then you shouldn't have gone that far. I left him standing there. Back home, I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat at the window, and watched as neighbors began to emerge from their houses. Word was spreading. It always did in Ridgewood Hollow. And this time, people weren't avoiding my eyes. They were nodding, acknowledging, some even waving. One of them, Carmen, a single mom 2 doors down, walked up the path with a cardboard box. I heard what you did, she said, handing it over. This is from a few of us. Extra firewood, just in case. I opened the box, small logs, kindling, even fire starters. Thank you, I said, surprised. No, she replied. Thank you. They fined me for letting my kid's bike sit on the lawn. Made me cry, and I didn't fight back. But you stood up. And now maybe they'll think twice. I closed the door after she left, holding the box in both hands, feeling something I hadn't felt in a while. Community. Not the kind they write into HOA rulebooks. The real kind. People watching out for each other. People who've had enough. That night, the temperature dropped to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Still no power. But I sat warm inside my house, fire crackling, Scout curled up by the hearth, and Molly sleeping soundly in her room again. Outside, the wind battered the HOA signs, staked at the neighborhood entrance. They flapped and bent in the cold. I wondered how long before they fell. The storm didn't pass, it doubled down. By Sunday morning, Ridgewood Hollow was buried in nearly 3 feet of snow. The sky had gone that peculiar shade of white-blue that promises more, and the wind howled through the pine belts like a living thing. It wasn't just cold anymore. It was dangerous. The power outage stretched into its 3rd day. The power company hotline had a recorded message. Due to high demand and difficult road conditions, restoration may take 48 to 72 additional hours. Translation, we were on our own. And the HOA, they were unraveling. I knew because they knocked on my door. It was just after noon. Scout barked before the knock even came. He must have sensed the desperation on the other side. I opened the door to find Linda and Frederick standing there, shoulders hunched against the cold faces, wind-chapped and flushed. Linda's red parka had lost all its authority. Frederick was visibly shivering. Mr. Delaney, she said, voice strained. We were wondering if You might have any extra heat sources. The clubhouse generator failed this morning. I leaned against the frame. That's rough. Frederick tried to step forward. Some of the elderly residents don't have space heaters or fireplaces. We're trying to help coordinate warming shelters, but the roads are iced. I said nothing. Linda's lips were trembling now, either from the cold or the shame. Maybe both. We know we made mistakes, she added. We never meant to endanger anyone. We misjudged things. I looked over her shoulder at the neighborhood. House after house was dark, their windows fogged with frost. Curtains drawn. Shadows of people inside bundled in layers. I imagined Carmen and her little boy curled up in a sleeping bag. Harold huddled under quilts. Ridgewood Hollow had become a silent frozen village. And this HOA, so proud, so unyielding, had no idea how to fix it. But I did. Come inside, I said quietly. They looked surprised, relieved. I led them into the living room, where the propane heater glowed and the fire in the stove cracked warmly. Scout sniffed them both and wandered off. I didn't offer them tea. I didn't offer them seats. I wanted them to feel the warmth, but also the weight. This, I said, motioning to the flames, was built with the same type of firewood you stole. Frederick lowered his head. Linda's voice cracked. We thought it would be temporary, that we could just remove the pile and store it until a board meeting. But it got cold so fast. You lied, I said. You said it went to disposal. You said you posted a notice. You didn't. You took it for yourself, for that clubhouse fire, for your own comfort. And my daughter got sick. Silence. Linda pulled something from her coat pocket, a small notebook. She fumbled with the pages and then handed it to me. Inside was a handwritten apology, sloppy but genuine, from Brady. Mr. Delaney, I didn't know what I was doing was illegal. I was following instructions, but that's no excuse. I never should have touched your property. I'm sorry for what happened to your daughter. I hope you can forgive me someday. It wasn't typed. It wasn't corporate. It was human. He gave it to us yesterday, Linda said. We're trying to make it right. I stared at it, then walked over to my desk and returned with a folded piece of paper, my printed copy of the formal complaint filed with the sheriff. Their names listed. Evidence tagged. I placed it gently on the table between us. The sheriff already has this, I said. But I've been told that if restitution is made and accountability taken before charges are finalized, some of the penalties could be reduced. They both stared at it like it was a lit fuse. What do you want us to do? Frederick asked quietly. Public apology, hand-delivered, to every home you ruled over this year. Signed, acknowledging the theft and the lie. Linda swallowed. And the firewood. You'll replace every stick, or reimburse it at market value plus damages, and then resign, all of you. Entire board, step down. Linda looked like she might argue, but didn't. Frederick exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for 3 days. We'll do it, he said. Before the next board meeting, I added. And if I hear you threatened anyone into silence or blamed this on Brady, I'll make sure you face criminal prosecution. I'm not bluffing. Linda nodded. They left 20 minutes later, warmer than when they came in. I watched from the window as they trudged through the snow, smaller now, no longer giants looming over this neighborhood. And that evening, the blizzard reached its peak. Wind gusts shook the glass. The snow blew sideways in great veils. A street lamp cracked and went dark. I loaded more wood into the stove, boiled water on the propane burner, and made tea with Molly, who had returned that morning and was drawing Scout in her notebook. Outside Ridgewood Hollow sat cold and buried. Inside our little home glowed. That night I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Because power wasn't just coming back. Power was shifting. And now, for the first time, it belonged to the people who lived here, not those who ruled over them. The morning after the blizzard, the world had transformed. Everything was silent, like the snow itself had swallowed sound. Ridgewood Hollow looked like a frozen postcard. White rooftops sagging under the weight driveways, still invisible mailboxes buried to the flag. But in that quiet, something had shifted, not just the weather, not just the power grid. Control. It no longer belonged to the board. And I knew it the moment I stepped out onto my porch and saw the crowd. Neighbors bundled in coats and scarves, boots crunching on ice, slowly gathering on the corner lot across from the HOA office. Nobody was shouting. There were no signs or chants. Just residents, cold, tired, angry, showing up, together. I sipped my coffee wrapped in my flannel coat, Scout beside me. The propane heater inside kept Molly warm. The wood stove was humming. I had heat light and dignity. Most of them didn't. I could see Carmen hugging her boy close to her chest, rubbing his back. Harold leaned on his cane wrapped in 3 scarves and what looked like 2 coats. Even Marjorie from Elm Street, who once reported me for improper seasonal decor, stood in the circle. That told me everything. The HOA's mask had finally slipped. By 9 a.m., Howard emerged from the clubhouse, squinting against the sun, reflecting off the snow. He wasn't dressed for the cold, just his usual long coat and gloves, the ones he wore when pretending to be more important than he was. His face tightened when he saw the gathering. He crossed the street and tried to speak. "Folks," he began, arms half lifted, "we understand. There have been some miscommunications. The board is working to—" No, Carmen cut in, her voice sharp despite the cold. "No more statements, just answers." Someone else called out, "Where's the firewood you took?" Another, "My grandma's been sick in a cold house for 3 days. Who's paying her heating bill?" Howard's jaw moved, but no sound came. He looked at me across the street, almost like pleading. I didn't move. Just lifted my mug and took another sip. Deputy Carlson's cruiser rolled up right then. Perfect timing. He stepped out and waved the crowd back. "We've opened an investigation into recent board actions," he said clearly, "and we ask for your cooperation as we conduct interviews." There were murmurs, but no arguments. People had reached their limit, but they also knew real justice was in motion. Howard turned, eyes burning, and marched back toward the clubhouse. The wind caught his coat, flaring it open like a cape, but there was nothing heroic about the man anymore. He looked small, hollow. That afternoon, the sun finally emerged. The snow began to shift, cracking, melting in places. Ice dripped from rooftops in rhythmic taps. Power was still out, but there was light now. At home, I helped Molly stack another batch of wood behind the garage. She worked with quiet focus, her gloves too big for her hands, but she smiled through it. She didn't complain. She never did. When we finished, she looked up at me and said, "Do you think they'll say sorry?" I crouched beside her. "I think they'll have to." She thought for a second. "Even if they don't, it's still warmer here." She was right. That evening, as the light faded and the sky turned a bruised purple, I took Scout for a walk through the neighborhood. Snowbanks lined the sidewalks, but I didn't mind. I passed Carmen's place, her fireplace finally smoking again. Harold waved from his porch, bundled up, but with a lantern glowing behind him. And near the clubhouse, I saw Linda standing alone in the snow holding a clipboard. Not issuing violations, not inspecting, just staring. She didn't see me, but I saw her. And for once I felt no anger, just pity. People like her had built their lives around rules, boundaries, and control, believing it would keep them safe. But when real life knocked, when storms came, when power failed, when neighbors suffered, they didn't know what to do. Because real strength doesn't come from fines or memos. It comes from showing up with firewood, with a thermos, with a quiet kind of resolve that doesn't shout but doesn't bend either. That night we roasted marshmallows over the stove. Molly laughed when one caught fire, waving it like a torch before blowing it out. Scout curled at her feet. I looked around our living room, warm flickering with orange light, and realized this wasn't just survival. It was victory. Not because I'd humiliated the HOA, but because I'd reminded them and the rest of Ridgewood Hollow what real community looks like. The snow would melt, the board would fall, but the memory of what they tried to take and what we refused to surrender would stay. Warmth, home, dignity. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, just a long wooden bench, faded carpet, and a judge who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. But justice doesn't need to look impressive, it just needs to show up. And that day, it did. It was 2 weeks after the storm, and Ridgewood Hollow had mostly thawed. Power restored, roads cleared. But the temperature in the community still cold, especially toward the board members who had gone conspicuously silent. The HOA had issued a single newsletter claiming they were under review and board meetings were postponed until further notice. But I wasn't postponing anything. My case had been filed under small claims, technically a civil matter. Property theft under 1,000 plus damages. But when Deputy Carlson sent his report to the county clerk, the DA tagged on allegations of willful misconduct and abuse of position. That made it more than a homeowner squabble. It made it a public embarrassment. Danielle sat next to me at the plaintiff's table in a tailored gray blazer and glasses that made her look even scarier than I remembered from her law school days. Across from us were Howard Klein, Linda Whitmore, and their lawyer, a smug man in a charcoal suit who kept calling everything an unfortunate misunderstanding. When the judge entered, we stood, then sat. Mr. Delaney, the judge began peering over the rim of her glasses. You allege that the defendants acting in their capacity as HOA board members unlawfully entered your property and removed personal property. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you are seeking compensation in the amount of $875 for the firewood, plus damages of $2,000 for medical bills, heating expenses, and distress. Yes. The judge turned to their lawyer, Mr. Caldwell. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and launched into a rehearsed speech about policy enforcement, aesthetic consistency, and the unfortunate lack of written communication. We acknowledge that a procedural oversight occurred, he said. However, the board acted in what they believed to be the best interests of the community. There was no malicious intent. The judge raised an eyebrow. Mr. Caldwell, your clients entered a private shed on private property and removed material they did not own. Was that firewood ever returned? No, Your Honor. It had already been used during the winter storm. And did your clients ever obtain written consent, a warrant, or a signed violation notice from Mr. Delaney? No, but we contend. I've heard enough. Danielle stood calm and cold. Your Honor, she said, in addition to the lack of due process, we have proof that the defendants knowingly misrepresented their actions. They claim the wood was disposed of when, in fact, it was stored behind the HOA office and used to heat the board's private clubhouse. She handed over a packet of printed photos, time-stamped, annotated. The judge flipped through them. I also have a letter from Brady Whitmore, a board intern, who admits to loading the wood and being told to keep quiet. More papers exchanged. Howard shifted in his seat, fidgeting. Linda stared straight ahead, like she'd left her soul in the parking lot. Caldwell tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a look. When all the evidence was submitted, the judge sat in silence for almost a minute. You could hear the ceiling fan squeak in lazy circles. Finally, she spoke. This is more than a procedural oversight. It is a blatant misuse of authority by individuals entrusted with community governance. I am awarding Mr. Delaney $875 for the value of the firewood, plus $2,000 in compensatory damages. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the State Housing Authority for formal review of Ridgewood Hollow's HOA board. Howard's jaw dropped. The judge stood. Court is adjourned. Gavel. Exit. It was done. Outside the courtroom, cameras waited local news outlets that had caught wind of the story once the sheriff's report became public. I waved them off, but Danielle gave a short statement about community over control and the importance of respecting property rights. Linda avoided eye contact as she walked past us. Howard tried to say something, his lips parted, but I turned away before he could. Back at home, I found a letter tucked into my mailbox. Handwritten, no envelope. You were right. Thank you for standing up for all of us. Carmen and half the block. Inside was a list of 12 names. 12 neighbors. 12 people who now believed what I'd tried to prove, that power in a neighborhood doesn't belong to those with clipboards, it belongs to those with courage. That night, the fire crackled softly as Molly curled up with Scout and her sketch pad. Did the bad guys lose? She asked. I nodded. They did. Are they going to jail? Probably not, I said. But they can't hurt anyone else here. She smiled. Good. She leaned her head on Scout, who gave a contented sigh. I looked out the window as snow began to fall again. But this time, I wasn't afraid of the cold, because the fire was ours. The warmth was real, and justice had finally come to Ridgewood Hollow. Spring came late that year, as if winter didn't want to let go. The snow melted in heavy sheets, revealing cracked sidewalks, frost-burnt grass, and driveways coated in sand. But under all that ice and silence, something else had thawed. The neighborhood. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand announcement, no banners or parades, but people started talking to each other again, waving from porches, helping shovel one another's walkways, sharing things, tool soup, even smiles. And the HOA, it collapsed from the inside. After the court ruling, the State Housing Authority launched a formal review. In less than a month, Howard Klein resigned. Linda followed a week later. Frederick tried to stay on, but after someone leaked an email he'd written mocking homeowners for whining about snow, the rest of the board voted him out. A temporary management team was installed, including 2 retired school teachers, 1 local contractor, and, shockingly, Harold. He grinned when he told me. They figured after Vietnam and 2 ex-wives, I could handle neighborhood politics. I didn't argue. They held an open town hall in the elementary school gym. No podiums, just folding chairs in a circle. Carmen brought cookies. Someone else brewed coffee in an old percolator. No one wore suits. No one brought clipboards. They asked what we wanted from the HOA. My answer was simple. Respect. That word hung in the air like smoke, heavy true. The following week, the new board announced an amendment to the bylaws. No enforcement action involving personal property would be taken without written consent, verified notice, and photographic evidence. Violation of this process would be grounds for immediate board dismissal. They called it the Delaney Rule. I didn't want my name on it, but I understood the power of it. People needed reminders, symbols, and if a pile of firewood and one pissed-off father could become a lesson in limits, so be it. One evening in mid-April, I took Molly to the nursery down the highway. We bought a cherry tree. She picked it out herself small thin, but with little green buds already forming. We planted it in the backyard not far from where the old firewood shed used to be. "This one's mine," she said, patting the soil. I nodded. "We'll make sure no one takes it." She grinned. "Even if they try, we'll fight again." I looked at her tough, gentle wise beyond her years, and I realized she wasn't just talking about trees. She was talking about everything. Later that night, Danielle stopped by with a box of paperwork. Officially closing the case, she said, "No appeals, no threats, no fines." We sat on the porch watching the sunset paint Ridgewood Hollow in gold and peach. "You know," she said, sipping a beer, "I'm not sure I've ever seen a neighborhood change this fast." I shrugged. Maybe it didn't change. Maybe it just remembered. She looked at me sideways. "You gonna run for the board?" I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. "I'd rather chop wood barefoot in January." She smiled. "Still, it's good to see what fire can do, even when it starts small." Before she left, she handed me one last envelope. It was from Brady. Inside was a short note. "Mr. Delaney, I've joined the National Guard. I want to do something better. Thank you for waking me up. Brady." I folded it slowly. Forgiveness has a weight to it heavier than anger, but somehow easier to carry. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and walked the neighborhood. Scout trotted beside me, his tail wagging through puddles of melting snow. The houses looked the same, but they weren't. There were no more mystery finds. No more threats taped to doors. Just people trying, living, being human again. I passed the old HOA clubhouse. The sign was gone. The building stood empty, its windows boarded, waiting for a new purpose. Someone had spray painted something on the plywood in neat, careful letters. "Community is not control." I smiled. Back home, Molly was waiting with her boots already on. "Can we go cut wood?" she asked. "Winter's months away." She shrugged. "We'll be ready." We grabbed the hatchets, walked to the edge of the tree line. The sun was rising and the birds were louder than I remembered. As I swung that first clean cut into a seasoned log, I realized something. I hadn't just reclaimed firewood. I'd reclaimed something bigger. My voice, my peace, my home.